Hi there. Today I'm going to try to explain how to use the OpenGOAL mod base that myself and Zed have created. This will help give you sort of a structure for creating mods for OpenGOAL for Jak and Daxter. And yeah, let's get into it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just kind of getting things set up. So you need to kind of create a GitHub repo, and we'll go into the details of that. I'm going to talk about actually making changes to your mod. So that's code changes. Maybe you're changing the behavior of something. If you're doing custom levels, high guitar, we'll talk about that. And if you're doing texture replacements, we can talk about that as well. After that, we'll talk about actually publishing your changes, publishing your mod to the outside world. There's a specific format that the mod launcher and eventually the vanilla launcher will hopefully support mods, and we'll expect similar formats, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last thing I'll go over is how to, when there's updates to the base game, the vanilla game as we call it, there's a way that you can easily merge those changes back into your mod. So, you know, if there's some quality of life enhancement on the vanilla version of OpenGOAL, you'll be able to merge that into your mod and you know, have that hopefully seamlessly work for you as well. Yeah, so let's get into it. Before we get into the modding aspect of this, first I recommend installing some tools that are just useful for working with the Jak project, whether it's the vanilla or the modded version. So if you go to the GitHub page for OpenGOAL and go to the Jak project repository and scroll down here to this README section, I'm assuming we're going to be on Windows, so we're going to jump to Windows here. And basically, this is one of the key components that I definitely recommend you install. We'll be using Task pretty heavily, as well as Git. So make sure you have those two installed. Doesn't hurt to install all of these. You don't need to go through the whole Visual Studio C++ workflows for the most part. We should be operating just in the goal code, and you can do everything through VS Code, not the full Visual Studio. So don't worry so much about this. This is the main component that I recommend installing for what we're going to be looking at today. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is navigate to the OpenGOAL mod base. There's a link in the description to get you here. And if you're not familiar with Git or in GitHub, I definitely recommend doing a little bit of research on your own. I'm not going to spend time here, but it will be helpful as we go. But nonetheless, I'll try to explain kind of the relevant bits as we go through. So a repository is basically just like a project, a collection of files that you can clone or download. In this case, we don't actually want to clone the mod base directly because you want to create sort of like a copy of the mod base, and that's going to serve as your mod, right? And so the way to do this is from the mod base page, you want to go to fork. And then it'll ask you, do you want to create a new fork? You may not see choose your owner. It may just default to your GitHub username here. In my case, I've already created a fork, and that is one of the limitations of this is that you can only have one fork on your personal account. So if you anticipate you're going to create multiple mods, what you may want to do is create what's called an organization, and then you can create multiple forks of the mod base under that organization. And so like one such organization is this OpenGOAL unofficial mods, and we'll just use that for this demo. So let's call this, let's just call it mod base demo. You can leave copy the main branch. You don't really need the history of the other branches. It's not really relevant. So you create fork. GitHub's going to spin here for a little bit. And then you should see that you have a copy, or you have your own repo now. And you'll see here it says forked from the mod base. So this is now your repo. You're in control of this, and this is where we're going to create your mod. So at this point, maybe you're wondering, why do we need the mod base? Why can't we just use the original Jak project that OpenGOAL, the vanilla OpenGOAL uses? And there's two main reasons for this. One is Zed and I have added a couple of nice like utility functions to hopefully make modding a little bit simpler to get off the ground. So I can show like put custom, nope, we renamed this. What did we call it? Mods custom code. So we have some helper functions, like this one, for instance, is called runs every frame. You can kind of get a guess at what that might do. We also have some things like input display. So basically, you can turn input display on or off, and you don't have to write all that code yourself or copy it from some other thing. We have little functions that are called whenever you pick up an orb. So maybe you want to play a jingle or warp Jak to some other location every time you pick up an orb. You would be able to like reuse this function and kind of do that without having to dig into the code to figure out where that happens. So there's plenty of examples of that. The second reason that we recommend using the mod base is because it comes with this very nice GitHub action. You'll have to go here and enable it, called cut mod release. And so what this does is it actually takes all the files in your raw repository and it collects the ones that are actually needed to build the mod. It zips them all up and it will create what's called a release on your GitHub repo. So this is a new repo. We don't have any releases yet. We'll get into that later, but that is a big benefit of using the mod base, is that you don't have to bundle your releases manually. So do recommend using the mod base here. Okay, so now you have created a fork of the mod base for your mod, and you have your own standalone repo on GitHub. So the next step we need to do is to clone this remote repository onto your local computer so that you can make changes locally and test it and everything like that. There's a couple tools to do this. I'm going to be using the Git command line tool because it's most familiar to me. There is like a desktop GUI that you can use. I'm just not familiar with it, so yeah, for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to be using the command line, but the commands are fairly simple, so don't get too freaked out. So you want to come here to this code button, and you want to click here. It's basically just going to copy this URL to your clipboard. And then you just want to open like Windows Explorer, File Explorer, to wherever you want to create your project. I just have like a projects folder under my documents, and this is where kind of all my mods live next to each other. And I'm just going to right click, open in terminal, and you should see it'll open the terminal in the folder that that was active. And then you just need to run this command, git clone, and then paste that URL for your mod. Make sure it's not the mod base. It should be your forked version. You won't be able to push changes to the mod base. You'll only be able to push to your fork. So hit enter. Give it a couple of minutes. It's basically downloading the mod base from the internet and unpacking it on your computer so that you can make changes. Yeah, so just give it a couple minutes. All right, looks like mine's finishing up. And we're done. Cool. So now that that's done, the next step we want to do is to copy the ISO data from our Jack1 disk into the folder so that we can use this in our development environment. So I have my Jack1 ISO here. I'm just going to right click and mount. There's probably a million ways to do this, but this is the easiest way I found. Just highlight everything, Control C, and then go back, find your new folder for your fork, and you want to go to the ISO data and then to the Jack1 folder and just paste everything in there. When you drag and drop your ISO onto extractor.exe or select it in one of the launchers, it's kind of doing this behind the scenes for you. We're just doing it a little bit more manually. Cool. So now what we want to do is make sure that the project just runs normally before we make any changes to it. So what I recommend doing is opening Visual Studio Code. You can just do new window. And open folder. And then you just want to navigate to the folder for your fork, mod-based demo, and leave it at this level, and just hit select folder down here. And yeah, so you now have sort of like an editor where you can make changes to the code and run things. Like for instance, if you want to see where the Jack1 goal code is, it's under goal source Jack1, and I don't know, like here's some camera code basically, right? Yeah, so let's actually test that everything is working before we make changes. You could do this in that terminal before, but I kind of like having this in Visual Studio Code. So I'll go up here to Terminal, New Terminal. Again, you should see it opens in the folder of your project, so you don't need to navigate or anything like that. And what we want to do first is extract the levels and the music and all the textures from that ISO data. And so to do that, we run task extract. This is basically just going to kick off the extractor.exe and run the other half of the extraction. And this will take maybe a minute or two, depending on your machine. 10 seconds, not bad. Cool. Next, we want to do task REPL. this is going to, if you see one of these Windows Defender things, by the way, you just hit allow. The reason for this is that we use a open port to communicate with the REPL in the game. So now we have the REPL open, and you just want to do the MI here to rebuild the game. Yeah, and this will take maybe a minute or so. What I typically like to do is to leave the REPL open. So what I'm going to do here is if you click this button, it's going to create sort of two terminals side by side and leave this one running. And then on this side, I usually will do my task boot game to actually kick off the game once the compilation and the build over here on the left is complete. Okay, so it completed normally. Let's do task boot game. And we get another Windows Defender. It's fine. And yeah, seems like the game is working to me. So let's go ahead and close this out. And yeah, at this point, your repo is working. Success. Okay, so we know the base game is working. Let's actually do some modding. Let's make a change and go through that workflow of applying that change to the game. So if you remember, Zed and I have created this file with some helpful utilities to just take action on common things. So you want to open this mod custom code file. Make sure you choose the Jack 1 version if you're working on Jack 1. So the file will open up, and then these are some of the helper functions that we've created. So for this demo, what should we do? Why don't we, how about when we pick up an orb, we make Jack twice as tall, or maybe not twice as tall, but we'll make him a little bit bigger. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the syntax and Lisp OpenGOAL language too much here. You'll just have to trust me, bro, that this code does what I say it does. But basically, we're taking the y part of Jack's scale. Jack is a target here, and we're going to multiply it by 1.5 times every time we pick up an orb. So let's save that change, and then we go back to our REPL down here, and we want to run mi again. This is going to recompile the game. Now, if you've left the REPL open this whole time, it's smart enough to know that you only changed the mod custom code file, and it won't recompile the whole game because a lot of that is unnecessary. So it should be quicker if you actually leave your task REPL open. Yeah, and you'll see that took like not even a second. So now we can task boot game again. And we're back in the game. And let's go pick up an orb, and hopefully Jack will grow if we've done everything correctly. Yep. Geez, okay. But the idea is there. It seems to be working. Cool. So just to revisit again, we made a change to a .gc file, goal code file. We saved it. In our REPL, we reran mi, that rebuilt the game, and then when we launched the game, it had the new code available to us. Okay, so we've covered custom code changes. Let's talk about custom levels now. If you're interested in creating custom levels, I definitely recommend checking out Qatar's detailed guide. I'll put a link in the description for that. He covers this in way more detail than I'm going to, but I do want to talk about how this kind of works with the mod base and how you need to deal with the REPL and everything like that. So to start, if you were unaware, the OpenGOAL base project as well as the mod base both come with a sample custom level called Test Zone 2. It has a checkpoint here called Test Zone Start that you can jump to. And it's this checkerboard pattern here. This is like just a 3D level, a sample one that was created to demonstrate that you can import 3D levels, custom 3D levels into Jak and Daxter. So what we're going to do is modify this level a little bit and make sure it gets refreshed in the game. So I'm just going to close this so it doesn't lag my computer. And I'm going to import my GLB file in Blender. And why don't we just create some copies of these? So just kind of doing this haphazardly to demonstrate that it does work. And so now let's go File, Export, GLB. Let's overwrite our testzone.glb. Okay, I think it completed. So now what we need to do is go back to our REPL and just rerun MI. The REPL is really nice. It looks at the timestamps of your GLB files to decide when something's been updated and whether it needs to be reconverted to the OpenGOAL format. So since I've overwritten the teststone.glb file, it should have a new timestamp. It should automatically figure out it needs to redo the teststone level. And it did. Cool. And then all we do is task boot game again. And in theory, we should have our modified version of the teststone 2 level. Yeah, and you can see there's all these extra cubes that I added because it's now pulled in my updated version of the file. Okay, so we've covered custom code changes, we've covered custom levels. The third thing I want to talk about is texture replacements. So you want to replace the texture of something that already exists in the game. So to start, you want to navigate to your project folder. Probably the easiest thing that you want to do first is figure out the directory and file name of the texture that you're trying to replace. So you can go to decompiler out, jack1 textures, and you'll see here a bunch of folders with like level names. So let's look for the title screen, I think has one, right? So this is the title screen folder. You'll see here is like the precursor legacy one. There's a equivalent in Japanese. There's the little like Naughty Dog stamp. There's the trademark with the mysterious purple pixels that we'll never understand. But yeah, basically, like if you wanted to replace the precursor legacy, you need to know that it's in title viz pris and it's named exactly this. So once you know what you're trying to replace, you can go back up to the root folder of your project. Just right click, new folder. You can call it texture underscore replacements. You have to call it this. And then inside here is where you want to kind of like recreate the folder structure that we saw in the decompiler out. And so in our case, we need a new folder called title viz pris. If you want to be less error prone, probably the better way to do this is just copy that folder from the decompiler out into here directly and then modify those textures in place, the copied version of them. But anyways. And then let's see, what was the name of the precursor legacy one? Precursor underscore legacy.png. Okay. So we'll create a new file here. I'm actually just going to steal one from an existing mod because I don't have the patience to do this. We'll use my orb hunt one. So again, just naming it the exact same way as in the decompiler out, precursor legacy, but instead I've changed the actual image here, right? So once we've done that, the process for updating texture replacements is a little bit different than custom levels and everything else. And MI is not sufficient, so we can go ahead and just close the game. You will actually need to, I think we can leave the REPL open, but we can over here in this panel do that task extract command again. So the extraction process is where the texture replacements are actually recognized and applied. When you rebuild the code through REPL running MI, that's not going to pick up texture replacements. So this is an important distinction. If you have a ton of texture replacements, this process may take a little bit longer than it normally does. I think last time it took, like 10 seconds. If you had a lot of texture replacements or really high quality ones, this process might take a little bit longer, but it seems like it completed pretty quickly. We shouldn't need to MI again, so we should be able to just task boot game. Now the problem is, I changed something that only shows up on the title screen, so we're gonna have to quit back to the title screen from here to be able to see it. And moment of truth. Nice. So there you have it, texture replacements. Okay, so now we have made code changes, custom level changes, and texture replacement changes locally. And we want to push those changes back to GitHub, and that way we'll be able to build a release for other people to actually play our mod. And so this is where a little bit of Git knowledge comes in, but essentially what we want to do is bundle all the changes we've made into what's called a commit, which is just sort of like a collection of changes. And we want to push that commit up to GitHub so that the GitHub copy of our repository is in sync with our local copy. If that sounds complicated, it's pretty simple. There's only a few commands that you really need to use. The first one I use pretty often is git status. It just kind of shows you the current state of the changes in your working directory. One thing that'll probably look different to you if I fix this by the time this video comes out is that I don't think texture replacements should be showing up under untracked files. It should be listed here. under the changes not staged for commit. I guess you might see if you've added new textures, they would be listed here under untracked files because those haven't been checked into the mod base in the past. But once you've committed them once, then Git knows they exist and they would show up here kind of under the modified section. Probably too much detail. The important thing you want to do is I have all my changes ready. I want to push them. You can just do git add dot. And this is going to add all your pending changes into what's called the stage, or like basically like sort of like prepping all these files to be committed and then pushed to GitHub. So it's sort of like 3 steps. You add to the stage, you commit, which actually bundles them together, and then you push, which is where you push the changes from your local copy back to GitHub. So we've done the git add step. We next want to do git commit, and the commit usually expects a message. I will usually just do -m and then type my message here, demo commit. Probably want to give a more meaningful message than that so that you can go back and recognize where you made what changes, but yeah. Just hit enter, and it'll give you some details about what has changed. If you do git status again, you should basically see no changes here. You'll see something like your branch is ahead by X commits. And that's just kind of telling you that, hey, your local copy has new stuff that the remote copy doesn't. And as it says, you can do git push to publish your local commits. Now, if you have switched branches, you may have to do a set upstream. But if you're just working on the main branch, which is probably what most of you starting out will just do, you can just blindly git push, and it should push back to your repository. If you want to be sure that that worked, you can go back to GitHub. You can actually just click this link if you hold Control. It'll take you back to GitHub, and you can either go here to the list of commits, or it'll actually show you the latest commit message here. And you can see this is the demo commit. And if we click into this, it'll show my code change for the 1.5 times. It shows you my new texture replacement. And the custom levels, obviously, it's not going to try to render a 3D level in GitHub's in your web browser, but it does show you that there is some change here. Yeah, basically that means you have successfully pushed your changes back to GitHub. All right, so now you have your changes pushed to GitHub, and the last remaining step is to format your mod and package it into the release format that the launchers expect. So today this is just the mod launcher I'm talking about, the unofficial mod launcher. But in the future, hopefully soon, the vanilla OpenGOAL launcher will also support mods a little bit more natively, and it should use a very similar format for that. So the mod base comes with a really nice tool that packages up these releases for you. So it should be copied over into your fork. And so basically, if you load up your fork repository page here, you can go up to this Actions tab. And then you want to look for this option, Cut Mod Release. Click that. And then go over here, click Run Workflow. And this is basically going to bundle your release for you. And you can actually choose kind of how the version number is incremented. So you see like v0.1.17 or whatever. If you wanted to update that last number, the 17, you would choose patch here. If you want to update the middle number, the 1 in my example, that would be minor, and the first number would be the major. It's going to start out at 0.0.0, I believe. So we'll just leave it at patch for this very first workflow. Yeah, and you just click Run Workflow. Now, if you refresh the page, you should see an entry here. This is the first workflow that we've created from this action. You can click into it, and you'll see the different steps that it's doing. So it does some metadata stuff. Don't really got to worry about this. It's going to create bundles for each different operating system that OpenGOAL can run on, and then it's going to finalize the release and zip everything up into one package, or I guess 3 packages, 1 for each environment. All right, and hopefully yours looks all green like this too. If there's ever any errors, you can click into this and expand the logs and try to debug it, but let's assume the happy path that your workflow succeeded. So you can go back to the Code tab, and you should now see under Releases a new release, v0.0.1. Again, this is just basically taken all the source code and compiled it with the executables, the .exe files on Windows, into these different tar.gz and .zip files for each operating system. So in theory, you could download the zip and install your mod totally manually. or this is basically the URL that we need to put into our list to add your mod to the mod launcher. So once you're at this step, presumably everything is good. We should be able to get your mod in the launcher. You can just reach out to Zed or myself, and we'll help get you set up, added to the mod launcher. Okay, so one last thing I want to talk about is how do you get updates from either the vanilla game or the mod base and pull those down into your version of the mod. Through the mod base, this should be pretty simple. It's a few more git commands, so I'll try to walk through and explain those as we go. The first thing I would like to do is just run git remote -v. Let me do this actually. And this will show you all of the remote repositories that are connected to this Git project that you're currently in. So presumably, if you haven't added any extra remotes, you'll just have this one entry. Well, you'll have two lines, one for fetch, one for push, but one entry for origin that points to your forked version of the mod. Now, what we want to do is add a new remote that points to the mod base, and then we'll be able to pull changes from the mod base into our project locally. So to do this, you want to go back to the mod base GitHub. So if you're at your fork, you can click this nice handy link and get back to the base. And similarly here, you want to copy the URL for this Git repository. Go back to your terminal. Again, this could be here in Visual Studio Code, or you can bring up a standalone terminal in this folder. It really doesn't matter. They're the same thing. And what we want to do is add that URL that we copied. We want to add that as a new remote, and we have to give it an alias. So we'll do git remote add, and then the next token in this command is the alias that we're giving to this remote. So let's call it modbase. And then you want to paste in that URL and hit enter. Now, if you do git remote v again, you should now have 4 entries. Again, one for fetch, one for push, for 2 different URLs, one for the origin, one for our new mod base. And what we want to do is fetch everything from the mod base. So right now, our local copy knows about the remote, but it hasn't actually pulled any of those changes onto our computer. So we can do git fetch --all. You can also say git fetch and give the alias that you've given it. We'll just care about mod base for now, so we can do it that way. Okay, cool. I'm just going to clear this. Again, if we do git remote v, just a sanity check, we still have both our remotes. And so essentially, like the working copy that we're on right now is still main from origin, our mod base, but Git on our local copy of this Git repository does know about the mod base and all the changes that the mod base has. So what we want to do is pull changes from mod base's main branch into ours. And to do that, we just do git merge. You give the alias, and then you just do /main. Main is the main branch. And this was a nice clean merge. No conflicts, nothing to do. You'll see this arrow too, and that's basically that there were 2 commits that are being merged in from the mod base into our mod. And if you do a git status, again, it'll say there's no changes. You just have that these, basically your branch is again ahead by 2 commits, because those 2 commits we merged into our mod have not been pushed back to GitHub under our mod. They just exist on the mod base on GitHub. And so we can just do a git push again. That's going to push our changes back up to GitHub. And if we go to GitHub and we look at the commits, we should see something about merging from mod base or whatever alias you've given it. And if you click into here, you can actually see what the change is. So this was a change I made on the mod base just as a sort of demo for this. And that's pretty much it. If you wanted to package another release, you would just go to actions, back to cut mod release, and run another workflow. And then the new release would have all those changes from the mod base pulled into them as well. And I think that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. And again, if you have a mod that you're ready to add to the mod launcher, definitely reach out to myself or Zed on Discord. I'll put our handles in the description, and we can get you all set up. Thanks for watching.